"You don't belong here, Brooks." That's the first thing I heard when I walked into the barracks, boots still damp from the rain outside. A laugh echoed down the row of bunks, harsh and cutting. I felt every eye turned toward me, like spotlights waiting for me to stumble. Corporal Mason leaned back against his locker, arms crossed. A grin stretched across his face like he'd just caught a thief. "Farmer boy thinks he can wear the uniform," he said. "Somebody tell him this ain't 4-H camp." The room erupted, laughter bouncing off the metal walls. My throat went dry, but I kept my mouth shut. I had learned early, sometimes silence was the only shield you had. I kept walking, boots squeaking on the floor, and slid onto my bunk. Mason wasn't done. Those boots? Hand-me-downs? No shine, no pride. "You think the Army's a charity case?" He kicked the edge of my trunk, rattling the lock. "Tell you what, Private, how about you take your sorry gear and crawl back to the farm before someone gets hurt carrying your dead weight?" His words hit like rifle rounds, sharp and unrelenting. I stared at my boots, scuffed from years of hard work before I ever set foot on this base. I could smell the polish, but the shine never quite took. To Mason, it wasn't just leather. It was a reason to make me less. The mess hall wasn't much better. Trays clattering, steam rising from eggs, voices echoing off tile walls. I spotted an empty seat, sat down, and barely got my fork in the scrambled eggs before a shadow loomed. Mason again. "That's my spot, Brooks." He shoved my tray just enough to spill coffee across the table. "Don't make me repeat myself." I stood, picked up my tray, and found a spot near the corner, far from the chatter. Laughter followed me, sharp and cold. No one said a word in my defense, though I noticed Private Ramirez glance up for just a second. His eyes said more than his silence ever could. "I see you. I know this ain't right." But he didn't move. Couldn't. That's how it was. You kept your head down, or you were next. Drill Sergeant Miller came storming through the barracks that night, voice like thunder. "On your feet!" We scrambled into formation, boots lined at the end of bunks, backs straight. He paced like a wolf. His eyes landed on me. "Brooks." My name cracked like a whip. "I've seen recruits come in soft before, but you're worse. You're invisible. Some men are born to follow, but you..." He stepped closer, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. "You're born to fail, and I don't have time for failures." My chest tightened. I kept my jaw locked, hands stiff at my sides. He wanted a flinch, a tremor, some sign of weakness. I gave him nothing, but inside the words dug deep. Born to fail. They stung worse than the laughter. When lights went out, the barracks quieted, but I couldn't sleep. I reached under my pillow and found the locket. Small, silver, worn smooth by years of fingers brushing over it. I flipped it open and stared at the inscription, the initials engraved on the inside. I never showed anyone. Not Mason, not Miller, not Ramirez. It wasn't for them. It was a reminder, a weight I carried in silence, a piece of someone I had lost long before this uniform was ever mine. Holding it grounded me when humiliation threatened to drown me. It reminded me that I had something worth proving, even if no one else saw it. The next morning, as cadence echoed across the base and boots stomped in rhythm, I fell into step. My voice was low but steady. Mason's was louder, mocking, but I kept mine locked in with the platoon. My legs ached, lungs burned, but I stayed in stride. No shortcuts, no excuses. That's all I had, discipline when respect wasn't given. I thought that was the end of it. Just another day of being shoved aside, laughed at, doubted. But then something shifted. Sergeant Miller lingered a second longer than usual during inspection. His eyes narrowed at my boots, still rough, still lacking the shine of Mason's polished pair. But he didn't say a word. He just moved on, his jaw tight. It wasn't approval, not yet. But it wasn't dismissal either. A flicker, a pause, a crack in the wall. And Ramirez. He sat closer to me in the mess hall that evening. He didn't speak, but he didn't move when Mason swaggered by. A small act, barely noticeable, but I noticed. Sometimes the smallest gestures carry the heaviest weight. I went to sleep that night with the locket pressed in my palm. Humiliated, yes. Still doubted, yes. But broken? Not yet. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. All I knew was that my silence wasn't weakness, it was waiting. And one day waiting would end. What I never expected was how fast everything would change. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The rain had been coming down all morning, turning the training field into a swamp. Mud sucked at our boots with every step, gear weighing us down like anchors. Sergeant Miller's voice cut through the storm. "Keep moving. No excuses." My shoulders burned under the rucksack, straps digging into my skin. Mason marched a few steps ahead, looking back at me with that smirk he carried like a weapon. "Don't slow us down, Brooks. Maybe out on the farm you could carry hay, but this is the Army." His laughter carried over the rain, and a couple of the others chuckled with him. I didn't answer. I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. Every step was defiance, even if no one noticed. When we finally stumbled back to the barracks, soaked to the bone, Mason was still at it. "You see him? Looked like he was going to drown in a puddle. Bet his mama still packs his lunch." The guys laughed, some nervously, some genuinely amused. I sat on my bunk, pulled off my boots, water pouring out of them. My hands shook from cold, but I kept my face calm. Ramirez sat across the room, didn't laugh, didn't look away either. Just a quick glance. That was all. Like he wanted to say, "I see you hanging in there." But silence was safer. I understood. The next morning brought another trial. The obstacle course. Mud still clung to everything, ropes slick, walls slippery. Miller barked the order, and we charged. Mason went over the wall with ease, pulling himself up and shouting, "See you in the rear view, Brooks." I jumped, fingers just missing the top, slid back into the mud. I tried again, arms screaming, knees bruised. Slipped again. I heard laughter, sharp and cruel. "Just quit already," someone shouted. But quitting wasn't in me. I clawed my way back up, nails tearing through mud, body trembling. At last, I hooked an elbow over the top, dragged myself across, and fell hard on the other side. Too late. Everyone else was already moving on. I didn't meet the time, but I finished. Crawled through the last stretch, face in the dirt, lungs on fire. When I finally crossed the line, Miller's eyes met mine. No praise, no smile, but he didn't look away either. He'd seen it. That was enough. That night in the barracks, Mason made sure to remind everyone of my failure. "Brooks can't even climb a wall. You think he's going to make it through? Hell, a strong wind would blow him over." He laughed, slapping one of the guys on the back. I sat quietly, oiling my rifle, making sure every piece was spotless. My silence irritated him. He wanted me to fight back, to break, to give him another reason. To laugh, I didn't. Ramirez walked by, stopped for a second, then slipped something onto my bunk when Mason wasn't looking. A protein bar, nothing big, but it felt like more than food. It felt like a message. Keep going. You're not completely alone. The days blurred together. Drills in the rain, endless push-ups in the dirt, chow hall meals where I sat in the corner with my tray. Mason strutted around like he owned the place, his boots polished to perfection, his laugh always a little too loud. I stayed quiet, listened, learned. Every insult stacked on my shoulders like another sandbag, but I carried them. Some nights lying in the dark, I wondered if Miller was right, if maybe I wasn't cut out for this. But then I'd reach under my pillow, feel the cool metal of the locket, and remember why I was here. Failure wasn't an option, not for me, not for the name inside that locket. The mess hall brought its own battles. One evening I sat alone again, tray half empty. Mason strolled by with his buddies, paused at my table. "Hey, Brooks, how's the mud taste today? Bet you're used to it, plowing fields and all." He leaned closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "Maybe you should stick to slopping pigs. Leave soldiering to men who can actually hack it." My jaw clenched, but I kept chewing, eyes fixed on the wall. Ramirez shifted in his seat a few tables over. He didn't say anything, but this time he picked up his tray and walked to my table, sat down across from me. Mason froze for half a second, then scoffed, covering his surprise. "Suit yourself, Ramirez. Just don't sink with him when he drowns." He walked away, but his voice carried across the hall, still mocking. Yet the silence at our table was louder. Ramirez didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone said everything. And then came the day of the extra drills. Miller had us running full kit across the field. Lungs burning, thighs screaming. Mason led the pack, yelling encouragement to himself more than anyone else. I lagged behind, fighting for breath. "Come on, Brooks, pick it up," Miller barked. I pushed harder, legs threatening to give out. Then it happened. Mason stumbled, gear shifting, ankle twisting in the mud. He went down hard, face first. A sharp cry, pain ripping out of him. The others slowed, hesitated. Miller shouted, "Leave him! Finish the run!" But I didn't. Something inside me shifted. I turned back, hauled Mason up by his straps, slung his arm over my shoulders, and dragged him forward. He cursed at me, spit, told me to let go. "I don't need your help, farm boy." But I didn't stop. Step by step, dragging him through the mud, I carried him until we crossed the line together. Miller's eyes burned into me. He didn't speak, but his jaw was tight, like he'd just seen something he hadn't expected. That night, the barracks were quiet. Mason sat on his bunk, ankle wrapped, staring at the floor. He didn't say a word to me, not a joke, not an insult. The silence was heavier than any of his laughter had ever been. Ramirez glanced at me, gave a small nod. Respect. Real this time. And for the first time, I felt a shift. The others didn't laugh as much that night. They didn't look at me the same way. Something had cracked. I wasn't just the farm boy anymore. I was something else. Something they didn't understand yet. I thought about the locket under my pillow as I drifted off to sleep. For weeks, I'd carried humiliation like a burden, endured the whispers and the laughter. But now, for the first time, I felt a change. A weight lifting, replaced by something new. They hadn't given me respect. I had taken the first piece of it with my own hands. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The storm hadn't broken yet, but it was coming. It started on a morning that felt different from the rest. The air was sharp, the kind that burned your lungs when you breathed too deep. The sky was gray, and the mud from yesterday's rain hadn't dried. Sergeant Miller stood at the front, arms crossed, his face stone. "Today's the live fire exercise, ambush scenario. Move as a unit, or you don't move at all." His words cut through the platoon, and I felt my stomach twist. We'd trained for this, sure, but today the bullets weren't blanks. Today mistakes meant more than push-ups or shouted insults. Today fear was real. Mason grinned like this was his stage. "Don't worry, farm boy," he muttered as he tightened his gear. "Just follow me and try not to get shot. I know you're used to chasing cows, but this is the real thing." His buddies laughed. I kept my eyes forward, jaw tight. Ramirez gave me that look again. Quiet, steady, like he was saying without words, "Just hold on." We hit the field at dawn. The mud grabbed at our boots, helmets slick with mist. The first crack of gunfire tore through the silence. Everyone dropped, heartbeats pounding. Mason barked, "This way! Follow me!" He charged ahead, too fast, too loud. The squad scrambled. After him, rounds zipping past. I stayed low, scanning, every muscle on edge. The air stank of gunpowder and wet earth. Sweat dripped under my helmet, though the morning was cold. My hands shook, but I forced them steady. Fear is always there. You just learn to keep it on a leash. Then it happened. Private Collins, 2 men ahead of me, his rifle jammed. He froze, eyes wide, tugging at the bolt that wouldn't budge. Mason turned, saw it, and yelled, "Leave it! Keep moving!" Collins panicked, fumbling, exposed. I didn't think. I slid next to him, yanked the rifle out of his hands, stripped it down fast. My fingers moved on instinct, the way my father had taught me before I ever wore a uniform. A couple of the guys stared, surprised at the speed, the control. 30 seconds, maybe less, and the rifle was back in Collins' hands. "You're good," I muttered, shoving him forward. He looked at me like I'd just pulled him out of a fire. Mason's eyes narrowed, his smirk faltering, but he barked again. "Don't slow down. Go!" We pushed forward, crawling through dirt, rounds whistling overhead. The enemy fire got heavier, and that's when Ramirez went down. He wasn't hit by a bullet. The training round hit his vest hard enough to knock the wind out of him, and he crumpled behind cover, gasping. Mason froze. He looked back, then forward again. Torn. I saw it in his eyes. He didn't want to risk himself. "Keep moving," he shouted, his voice cracking just enough to betray him. "Leave him. He'll get up." But Ramirez wasn't getting up. His face was pale, breath ragged, panic in his eyes. I knew that look. He needed help now. Something in me snapped. I broke from cover, low and fast, ignoring Mason's shouts. "Brooks, get back! You're going to get killed!" I didn't care. I reached Ramirez, grabbed his vest, dragged him across the mud while rounds cracked above us. He groaned, tried to push me away, but I pulled harder. My legs screamed, my back on fire, but I kept moving until we were behind solid cover. "You're good, breathe," I said, patting his chest. His eyes met mine, wide with fear, but behind it, trust. Mason yelled again from up front, "You're insane!" But his voice sounded thinner now, less sure. We regrouped and pushed toward the final target. Mason still barked orders, but no one moved as sharp to his voice anymore. They glanced at me just for a second before moving. Like a shift had started, small but real. I stayed focused, every sense locked on the mission. My uniform was soaked, my hands raw, but something inside me had changed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting like I belonged. The last push came hard. We had to storm the final bunker, suppress fire from the flanks. Mason shouted, "On me!" and bolted forward, but his movement was sloppy. Gunfire pinned him down halfway, and he froze, ducking low, eyes darting. He wasn't leading anymore. He was stuck. Everyone hesitated. Then Sergeant Miller's voice roared over the radio, "Who's taking point?" The silence was suffocating. My heart hammered. I heard Mason's ragged breathing, saw the fear in the others' faces. Then I heard my own voice, louder than I expected. "I'll take it." The words came out steady, stronger than I felt. I moved, fast, low. Every drill, every push-up, every insult I'd swallowed brought me here. I signaled with my hand and the squad followed. We laid down fire, moved as one, and in seconds the bunker was ours. Smoke cleared. My chest heaved, but we had done it. For the first time, I wasn't the last across the line. I was the first. Back at the debrief, we stood in formation, mud still dripping from our gear. Miller paced in front of us, eyes sharp. "That was chaos," he growled. "Some of you forgot everything I taught you." His eyes landed on Mason. Mason straightened, tried to hide his shaking hands. Miller's gaze lingered, then shifted to me. "And some of you—" He paused long enough to make the silence hurt. "Some of you proved today that you've got more in you than anyone expected." My stomach flipped. He was talking about me. Mason's jaw clenched, his face red. Ramirez stood taller beside me, pride clear in his eyes. Then came the question. Miller stopped directly in front of me. "Brooks, where'd you learn to clear that weapon like that? That wasn't training I gave you." I froze. Everyone was watching. Mason sneered, waiting for me to stumble. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the locket. My hand shook just slightly as I opened it, revealing the worn dog tag inside. "My father," I said quietly. "He served. He taught me before I ever came here." The barracks went dead silent. Even Mason's smirk disappeared. Miller's face softened just a fraction. He nodded once, slow. "That explains a lot." He stepped back, eyes scanning the platoon. "Lesson for all of you. Don't judge a man by the shine on his boots. Judge him by whether he shows up when it counts." The squad shifted, uneasy, but something had changed. I felt it in the air. They looked at me differently now, not as the weak one, not as the farm boy, as a soldier. Mason's eyes darted away, his shoulders slumped. Ramirez gave me a small grin, pride clear as day. My chest felt lighter, though my body was exhausted. The insults, the mockery, they hadn't broken me. They had built me for this moment, and for the first time I believed I belonged. That night in the barracks, the usual laughter was missing. Mason sat in silence, his head low. Ramirez dropped onto the bunk beside me, handed me half of a candy bar he'd stashed away. "Hell of a move today," he said, quiet but certain. I smiled, took it, and for once the silence around us wasn't heavy. It was respect. Lying in the dark, I held the locket again, thumb brushing over the engraved letters. I whispered under my breath, words only I could hear. I'm not failing. Not now. Not ever. Outside, the flag whipped in the wind, the sound sharp against the night. And I knew deep down, this was just the beginning. The storm had broken, and I was still standing. The barracks had a strange quiet after the live fire drill. Normally there was noise, boots thudding, jokes tossed across bunks, Mason's laugh carrying louder than anyone else's. But that night it felt different. Guys polished rifles in silence, the air thick with something unspoken. I sat on my bunk, locket hidden in my fist, and I could feel eyes on me. Not the same mocking stares I'd grown used to. This time it was different, heavier, curious, respectful maybe. Mason sat across the room, ankle still wrapped from before, his usual smirk gone. He fiddled with his bootlaces, but his hands shook. No one gathered around him like they used to. His crew avoided his eyes, cleaning their gear in silence. I caught one of them glance at me, then back at Mason, and for the first time I saw it clear. He wasn't their leader anymore. He'd lost them. That shook him worse than the injury. At chow the next day, the shift became obvious. The line moved quick, trays sliding, boots squeaking on tile. I grabbed mine, filled it with whatever was left, and made for the corner table out of habit. But Ramirez stopped me. "Sit with us," he said, nodding toward the middle. His voice was quiet but firm. The others at the table looked up, waiting. For a second I froze. It felt wrong, like I was stepping into someone else's place. But Ramirez held my eyes until I sat. The hall went strangely still. Mason walked in late, tray in hand, and his eyes landed on me sitting where he used to sit. His jaw clenched, but he kept walking. He passed my table and sat in the far corner, alone. Nobody followed. The silence that wrapped around him was louder than any insult he'd ever thrown at me. Later that week, Sergeant Miller called us into formation. His voice carried across the yard like always, sharp and demanding. "Performance review," he barked. "You've all had wins, you've all had screw-ups. But one of you," his eyes moved down the line, stopping on me. "One of you proved something none of us saw coming." My throat went dry. Mason stiffened beside me, eyes narrowing. Miller stepped closer. "Brooks, step forward." I moved, boots heavy on the gravel. Miller's gaze locked on me, unreadable. "When this cycle started, I doubted you. I thought you were dead weight. But last week, you didn't just carry yourself. You carried this platoon. And that matters." He paused, letting the words hit. "Respect isn't given in this army. It's earned. You earned it." The platoon stayed silent, but I felt the shift. Heads turned, eyes followed. Mason's fists tightened at his sides, his face pale with anger and shame. For once, he had nothing to say. That silence was louder than all his mockery. That night in the barracks, he finally cracked. He stood in front of my bunk, arms crossed, voice low but shaking. "Don't think this changes anything, Brooks." The room froze. No one moved. Ramirez stood up slow, his voice calm but steady. "It already did." The words hung in the air like a slap. Mason's face burned red. He opened his mouth, then shut it, eyes darting to the others. None of them backed him up, not one. He turned, muttering under his breath, and disappeared into the hallway. It was a small moment, but it felt huge. For weeks he'd had the power. Now it was gone, taken from him, not by fists or anger, but by what had happened on that field. I hadn't just survived, I had proven I belonged. And Mason, he had to live with the fact that when the bullets flew, he froze, and I didn't. Sergeant Miller caught me alone the next morning after inspection. His voice wasn't loud this time. "Brooks," he said, hands behind his back, eyes steady. "I misjudged you. That's on me. You've got something most men don't. Discipline, heart, the kind of thing I'd trust on my flank." For a second I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. He nodded back, and that was it. No long speech, no ceremony, but it meant more than anything Mason had ever thrown at me. The rest of the platoon picked up on the shift quick. In drills, they watched me, not mocking, watching. In chow, they saved me a seat. In the barracks, Mason kept to himself, his laugh gone, his voice smaller. He wasn't the center anymore. The weight had moved. And the strangest part? I didn't feel like gloating. I didn't want revenge. All I felt was tired. Tired, but steady. The way you feel after carrying a pack all day, sore but standing. I hadn't set out to take Mason's spot or anyone else's. All I ever wanted was to be treated like I belonged. And now finally I did. That night Ramirez sat beside me on my bunk. "You know," he said quietly, "some of us saw it before the sergeant did. Just took a little longer to come out." He grinned, small and honest. "Glad you didn't quit." I smiled, thumb brushing the locket under my shirt. "Me too." When lights went out, I lay there in the dark, listening to the silence. No laughter, no jeers, just breathing, the hum of the barracks at rest. For the first time since I'd arrived, I wasn't the outsider. I was part of the unit. And that silence, the one that used to feel like loneliness, now felt like something else. Respect, brotherhood. Mason turned over on his bunk, restless. Maybe he finally understood. Maybe not. But that was his battle to fight. Mine was already changing shape. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. More drills, more tests, more pain. That was the army. But I did know this. I wasn't invisible anymore. And once you're seen, truly seen, they can never erase it. Not Mason, not anyone. The barracks felt different in those final days. Not quieter, not louder, just heavier, like the weight of everything that had happened still hung in the air. Boots were lined sharp at the end of each bunk, rifles polished clean, the usual rituals of soldiers trying to look sharper than they felt. But under all of it, something had shifted. For the first time since I'd stepped onto that base, I wasn't the one carrying the shadow. I wasn't the joke in the corner. I had a place now, even if it had been carved out the hard way. That night after lights out, I sat on my bunk cleaning my rifle under the dim glow of a desk lamp. The familiar rhythm of cloth against steel calmed me. Ramirez sat nearby, scribbling a letter home, his quiet presence steady as always. Across the room, Mason lingered in the doorway, like he wanted to say something. His shoulders slumped, his face pale, eyes hollow. For a long moment, he just stood there. Finally, he nodded once, stiff, almost painful, a silent apology. No words, just a gesture, and then he turned and disappeared into the hall. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Ramirez looked up, eyebrow raised. "Guess even he knows when he's beat," he muttered, half a smile curling. I shrugged, setting the rifle down. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe he just finally saw the truth." The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind that comes when battles are over, when grudges lose their teeth. The next morning, Sergeant Miller inspected the barracks. His eyes, as sharp as ever, swept across the bunks. He stopped at mine, glanced at my boots, then at me. For the first time, he didn't scowl, didn't bark. Instead, he paused, gave the smallest of nods, and moved on. Nobody said anything, but everyone noticed. Respect from Miller wasn't handed out. It was earned. And that nod, it was worth more than a medal. Later that day, we marched across the yard, cadence ringing out, boots slamming in perfect rhythm. For the first time, my voice carried strong, not hidden behind the others. I felt it in my chest. The pride, the weight, the belonging. Ramirez caught my eye mid-step and grinned. I grinned back. We weren't just recruits anymore. We were a unit. The real moment came that evening, though, just before lights out. Miller walked in, checked the room, then stopped by my bunk. The barracks froze. Nobody dared move. He studied me for a second, then gave a slow, deliberate salute. Not a drill, not a command. A salute of respect. My heart jumped into my throat. I scrambled to return it, sharp and steady. When he turned and left, the room stayed silent for a long time. Even Mason didn't move. I lay back on my bunk, hand brushing the locket under my shirt. My father's name pressed against my palm, the letters worn, but still strong. I whispered into the dark, words only for him. I earned it. Outside, the flag rippled under the floodlights, its fabric snapping in the night wind. And for the first time, I felt the truth deep down. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I belonged. In this life, respect doesn't come from where you're from, or what you wear, or who people think you are. It comes from what you endure, what you give, and what you stand for. That's the only thing that lasts. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The floodlights hummed over the parade ground, casting long shadows across the rows of boots. The platoon stood at attention, silent, as the flag snapped in the evening wind. In that moment, something happened that none of us expected. Sergeant Miller, the same man who once called me born to fail, turned toward me. His chin lifted, and with steady precision, he gave me a single deliberate nod. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a speech. But every soldier there understood what it meant. Respect. Earned, not given. That image will never leave me. One quiet nod beneath the American flag, carrying more weight than 100 shouted orders. And maybe that's the lesson we're meant to carry forward. Life, like the Army, has its ranks, its harsh words, its unfair judgments. Some people will always look at you and think they know your worth. They'll measure your boots, your accent, your past. But the truth? Actions speak louder than words. You prove who you are, not by shouting, but by standing steady when the storm comes. By lifting others when no one else will. By refusing to break when everyone else expects you to. Injustice cuts deep, but resilience builds stronger. Prejudice tries to divide, but brotherhood brings unity. And in the end, honor belongs to the ones who endure, who give, who stand. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But more than that, it shows the world what you're really made of. If this story touched you, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story we share together. Until then, stay strong, stay steady, and remember, you're never standing alone.